This is episode number 2 with Armin Shimerman. Coming up.
After I moved to California from New York, that it was terrifying for me to go to auditions. Even if you don't get something, it doesn't mean that the opportunity is over. It only means it may be postponed. It decimated my plans to be a Shakespearean actor, but because I made that huge mistake, it took me to New York, where much better things happened, including my meeting of Kitty. All I knew was, I don't know what's going to happen. I know I have to climb this mountain, but I don't know how far I get. I don't know if I'll fall off the mountain, but I know I have to do it, but it's still daunting. And am I then a man to be beloved? Ah!
Hey there, thank you so much for checking out this podcast. Are you a subscriber yet? If not, click that subscribe button so that you do not miss anything ahead. And if you have an extra moment, go ahead and rate and review the show in iTunes or wherever you find podcasts. That will help others find out about the show. I appreciate all your comments, and thank you so much for doing that. Hello and welcome to The Working Actor's Journey. My name is Nathan Agan, and this podcast is in-depth interviews with working actors, people who have been doing this and getting paid for it professionally for 30, 40, 50 plus years. It is about finding out what took them from A to B. How did they get started? How do they actually work on material? What challenged them? What did they face early on in their career? What do they still get challenged by? And what have they learned from a lifetime of acting? That's what the goal and the purpose of this show is, and so I'm glad you are here. Just so you know, there's going to be about 10 episodes for the first season of this podcast. Another reason I'm really excited about this show is because these are stories you probably don't already know. The people that I will be talking to, you may recognize them, either their voice from something you've heard or a video game, or maybe you've seen them on TV or in a movie, or maybe even something on stage. These are amazing actors in their own right, and they've been doing this for decades. And when I talked to younger actors and people starting their career about what they wanted, what they most hoped to attain in their own career, one phrase that came up again and again is working actor. Most actors that I talk to just want the opportunity to be able to work, to keep doing this, to work with great people on fun and challenging material, and to get paid for it. That really is the dream. I mean, of course, a lot of people have big ideas and, would love to do X, Y, or Z, and that's all well and good. But really, when it comes down to it, most people, whatever their passion is, and in this case, acting, you just want to be able to get paid to do what you love. And so these are people that have made that their career. I think these are going to be stories that are extremely relevant for you listening. If you are an aspiring actor or you're a working actor at the beginning of your career and you want to find out, what have other people that have already kind of gone down this road, what have they figured out? Maybe what can I avoid? What can I try to do more of? That, again, is another one of the big goals of this show. Now, a quick word about me, your host. Again, my name is Nathan Agan. I'm an actor. I studied theater at the University of Southern California, done a lot of theater, a little bit of TV and film. I'm also an entrepreneur, work for myself online. I'm a bit of a goofball, which maybe you'll hear on this show. And I'm also a bit of a Shakespeare nerd, love studying it, reading it, performing it whenever I get the opportunity. I feel extremely fortunate about the people I've worked with, the people I have been taught by, and the people I've just been able to observe. And I want to do what I can to share the wisdom and experiences of all of these amazing, fantastic working actors out there. I want to do what I can to share that and allow more actors out there the opportunity to really learn from these greats. So I imagine that there will be at least 3 kind of audiences for this show. First is people in their 20s or 30s, or people just starting their career if later in life you've decided this is something you want to pursue and you want to shorten that learning curve. This is absolutely something that I hope will be valuable in your acting journey. And so I'm really thrilled that if you're part of that group, that you're listening to the show. Secondly, maybe you just enjoy behind-the-scenes stuff with actors. Perhaps you recognize someone's name or face and you just want to hear more about their process, their journey. And I'm glad that you're listening too. And third, if you just enjoy long-form chats with interesting people that have had fascinating journeys and lives, then I'm really thrilled that you're here too. So that's the show in a nutshell. Those are the goals. That's what I'm hoping to do here. I am really grateful for you listening. And again, whatever group you fall in, wherever you are in your life, I am thrilled that this can become part of your journey. In the acting business and in life, there is so much uncertainty and vulnerability and rejection. Wouldn't it be nice as an actor if you could find a little bit of peace in the process? Back in 2010, I found something that really helped me out with a lot of the anxiety and worry, and that is meditation. I really wish I had known about this when I was pursuing a career in acting in Los Angeles. Now, fast forward to today, I haven't missed a day of meditating in 7 years. I find it that useful. And that's also why I created a free online course delivered by email. So you can go to freemeditationcourse.com and sign up right now. It has tips and ideas and advice and scientific evidence because it has been proven it's good for you. You can start with just 30 seconds. I guarantee you will experience a difference. Go to freemeditationcourse.com and start your journey right now. Today on the show is Armin Shimerman, and he is probably best known to audiences for playing Quark on the Star Trek Deep Space Nine television series for about 6 years. I met Armin in the early 2000s, probably when I was taking classes at the Antaeus Company. I would guess that's how we first connected, him coming in to teach Shakespeare for a night or something. And over the years, I got to work with Armin in a lot of different capacities when he was directing, when we were fellow actors, when he was teaching. And he's always been just a very giving and very kind and very unassuming and really wonderful person and teacher and friend. And so I knew when I was doing this project, I wanted to reach out to Armin. And even with his really demanding schedule of work and teaching, we were able to find some time together. And so I'm thrilled that we were able to do that. In fact, I remember actually after a few years that I had been at Antaeus, Armin was doing some kind of class, maybe like a master class on Shakespeare, and I don't know if it was monologues specifically, but I remember him working on a piece, talking to us about it. It was from Richard II, and he showed us how there was really kind of a legal structure. And we actually talk about this in the conversation today, but he really broke it down with, the premise and the evidence and the conclusion. And it just was that cliched moment of a light bulb going off of, oh my God, I can really see this in the structure of the piece. And then when we started looking at other monologues, you could see that same structure. And it was just that switch kind of going off for me of, oh, okay, I really get this now on another level. I really had not seen that. And with Armin's help, I'm now seeing these monologues and pieces in a completely different light. It was just amazing. And I still remember that evening, how much it changed how I looked at Shakespeare. So Armin was born in New Jersey, and he did a little bit of crisscrossing in his career. Started on the East Coast, came out for school on the West Coast, went back to New York for Broadway, and then came back out to LA to work in film and TV. But he's been working 50 years in the business. He has nearly 200 credits on IMDb, with 4 projects in post-production. He's done long-running recurring characters on the shows Beauty and the Beast, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and Boston Legal. He voices Dr. Nefarious in the video game Ratchet and Clank, as well as doing many other voiceovers and video game characters and commercials. He is a Shakespeare scholar and teacher and director and actor. In recent years, he has played King Lear's fool at the Guthrie in Minnesota and as Leo Tolstoy in the play Discord. He also won an award for his stage performance in The Seafarer. Armin is also a writer, and he's written a few novels in the Merchant Prince series, which has kind of a sci-fi and Renaissance twist to them. In today's conversation, we talk about him finding acting in high school and how that developed, him studying and working at the Old Globe in San Diego, finding one of his mentors in a Broadway play, many of his ups and downs during his career, what he believes has kept him working all these years, and we are even treated to some of Armin's Shakespeare with Richard of Gloucester. There's a lot in here. It was a wonderful conversation. I really appreciate how open and honest Armin was here, and I am excited to share this conversation with you, so please enjoy my chat with Armin Shimerman.
And when they heard her, they said, "Boy, that's good. Oh, can you help us with the other actors?" And
Oh, cool.
She got hired to do that as well.
It's a tricky accent, or just I don't know if you call it an accent or a regional dialect. I mean, but it's it's such a unique one in the U.S. as well.
Yeah, it's a combination of course, French and some Brooklyn actually, or Italian, probably more than Brooklyn, and of course Southern. They all. And there are different Cajun accents depending on which part of Louisiana you're from. And she's actually able to differentiate at least three that she's told me about. So she's very good at it.
That's pretty cool. Are there any particular accents that you are, like Kitty, like very strong?
I do a lot of accents.
Yeah.
I do a lot of accents. My voiceover career is really not based on accents, but many times I get auditions because they ask me to do a German accent or a Swedish accent or a French accent or Irish accent, lots of British accents. And on occasion, that's what I do. I record in a foreign dialect.
And was that something that the accent work came as just a product of you wanting to learn it as an actor, or did you have an ear for it, when you were younger?
I think I had an ear for it. I grew up in a household where people had different accents. So I think I had an ear for it. When I started working in the theater in New York, they asked us for the regular ones, the English and the Irish. And so that came about. And then I just was pretty good at picking up accents and hearing that. I've done plays where I've had to use accents. Irish accent, once I had to do a South African accent. Don't know if I was that successful with the South African one. But I do that, and it is part of my bag of tricks.
Well, I was actually in doing a little research. I had never played the game, but I came across a clip from the Ratchet and Clank series, and it really did kind of spark a question of like the character is Dr. Nefarious, right?
Dr. Nefarious, yeah.
And I'm so fascinated by the voices that a lot of voice actors come up with, and I mean, was that something that you kind of had in the back of your mind somewhere else that you had developed along the way, or how did that
I think
voice
it just showed up at the audition.
Oh, really?
And then, unfortunately, that's the one they chose. Unfortunately, only because I've done about, I'd say, 5 or 6 Ratchet and Clank games, as well as a movie, and it's a very hard one on my voice. After about a half hour, my throat is trashed. But it just came up. When you do an audition, for me anyway, something just comes out of inspiration, and you do it, and you hope that that's what they're looking for. And occasionally they'll refine it. They'll say, "Can you go higher? Can you go lower? Can you, try something different?" And in that particular field, because the people are so good, and I'm not very good at it. I'm a dilettante compared to the experts, the brilliantly talented people who work in that field. So I have to run 3 times as hard to keep up with my fellow actors.
Now, I think this is you being quite modest because No,
it's not. I can be modest, but this is the truth.
All right.
When I'm in sessions with other voiceover actors, I am in awe of what they're capable of doing. I cannot do that. I'm an actor who does voiceover work. I'm not a voiceover actor per se. But no, I'm not being humble. I can be humble, but this is not me being humble. Those guys are incredible, and they spend their lives perfecting voices, sounds, all sorts of things, and they can turn them on at a moment's notice. I am limited to, I don't know, if I had to guess, I would say about 24 maybe sounds or voices or accents. And but the people that I work with can do hundreds, and that's not over-exaggerating.
Well, you brought up the point. You said you grew up in a household or around a lot of different voices and things like that. So I wanted to kind of talk about that a little bit. So where did you grow up?
I grew up in the middle of New Jersey, a little town called Lakewood, which is outside of Asbury Park. It's inland a little from where Hurricane Sandy hit. My father was an immigrant originally from Poland. Then he immigrated to Palestine. It wasn't Israel yet, and then at just at the time that Israel became a state in the late 40s, my father followed his family to the United States. And so I grew up with that. My parents got divorced when I was 7, and my grandmother, she was a Russian immigrant. So now I was no longer listening to a Polish accent. I was now listening to a Russian accent. And my mother was the daughter of 2 Russian emigres. She did not have an accent, except she did have an accent. We all have accents. She had a Cleveland accent, which is rather nasal, and so as I said, I grew up in a household with many accents.
And so, what kind of work did your parents do?
My father, when I was a child, was a farmer, but that was temporary work. He was by profession. He painted houses in Palestine, then in New Jersey, where I was born, then in Cleveland, where he moved to after my parents got divorced. And then back to New Jersey again when he moved back, just about the time that I moved to California, he moved to New Jersey.
Oh, okay. So you were living primarily with your mom after the divorce?
Yeah, my mom and my grandmother.
Oh, okay. And so what kind of household was it with your mom? Was it a very artistic household or food-based household?
No, there was no artistic input whatsoever, except my grandmother was very dramatic, but it had nothing to do with theater. She was just a very dramatic lady, being Russian. My mother and my grandmother were extremely poor, so I grew up in a very poor household. In fact, most of the time my mother wasn't home. She had 2 or 3 jobs that kept her busy all the time. My grandmother was the titular head of the family, and so my brother and I spent most of our time with her. Although any chance we could get, we got out of the house.
And what kind of things would you guys get into?
Oh, we lived in a wonderfully rural area in New Jersey. A little town of Lakewood, where I'm from, was enormously pastoral, and it's in the middle of the Pine Barrens. So we would play amongst the little forests that were around, and there was a huge lake. It's why it's called Lakewood. And so we would paddle in the lake, or that would be in the summer, of course, or ice skate in the winter. It was an enormously rich and gentle childhood, and I'm very grateful for that. Things changed when at 17 I moved to Santa Monica, but my childhood was a really good one. Although at the time I wasn't aware how poor my family was. Later on, when I look back, I went, "Wow, how did we survive?" But I knew nothing about that, and it was just perfect in the beginning.
So when you moved while you're in high school out to California. Was that kind of just a family decision?
Well, my mother did a very heroic thing. She did many heroic things, but this was perhaps the most heroic. I was a sophomore in high school, and my mother realized that I had to go to college. She couldn't afford college. That was out of the question. And so she looked around and saw that if you were a California resident, you could go to the UC system for practically nothing. And so in order to get my residency, she moved all of us out to California, and she found new work, new residents, new friends. She drove us in a small VW Bug from New Jersey to Santa Monica. did all the driving herself. And that was, when I look back on that, that must have been a horrendous trip for her. Among other things, everything was packed into the VW, so it was even hard seeing out the windows because there were bundles and luggage and people, and it was difficult. And she did all that for me, and I am enormously grateful.
And did you grow up an only child, or did you have brothers and sisters?
No, I have a brother who's younger than I am. He's 2 years younger than I am. His name is Mark, M-A-R-C.
And what kind of work does Mark do now?
Ironically, he works in outer space.
Really?
He's retired now, but for the longest time, he helped put satellites up into space.
Wow. I mean, from a young age, did you guys have that kind of difference, you being more artistically inclined, him being more scientifically inclined?
He was never really scientifically, it's just where he worked. He wasn't an engineer. He was the next step down from an engineer. So what happened was my brother would get the plans from the engineers about how to make things, and then he would help make the designs for what the people on the floor had to do as far as construction. He was always more... Yes, let me answer your first question. There was a great divide between us. I was always very artistic and had my head in books, and my brother was a much more middle class sort of student, his understanding of math is probably better than mine, but I wouldn't call him a scientist by any means. I don't think he'd take umbrage at that.
Okay, so the artistic stuff that started to show up with you, was it theater first, or was it painting or drawing?
It was theater first. When I moved to Santa Monica, lucky for me, I was in an English class with a man named Jellison, and Mr. Jellison, and he said to me, I'm directing a play here at high school. Would you like to audition for the play? And I knew nobody, and he said, well, you'll be able to make friends if you get into the production. And that's what happened. I was cast as the lead in the production, and I went on to do the next two high school plays. At that point, I was a senior. And when I went on to college, I had no real intention of continuing my acting career. I started out as a poli-sci major, hoping to become a lawyer, but I kept getting cast in plays over and over and over again. Everyone should have my problems. And so by the time I graduated from college, it looked like that was the path I was going to take. And then I was enormously fortunate. Even before I graduated from college, I was offered a very nice position at the San Diego Shakespeare Festival at the Globe Theater, and the rest is history. But my brother and I were always very different. It was quite obvious, I think, to my brother that I was heading in one direction, and he did not want to compete in that arena.
I see. And so, and it's probably you also weren't very interested in competing in his arena either. No,
but I, being older, had my sights sort of on theater and performance, and I didn't really look back over my shoulder to see what my brother was doing. But I was always the older brother, and if I can say this, I think he suffered to some small extent living in my shadow.
Was that something you were aware of? Younger?
No, not until much later.
Oh, okay.
No, not until I had great success in the theater did I realize that my brother was even comparing us. He's an incredible, accomplished person, and has a much bigger heart than I do. And I envy his acceptance of life. It's really quite Zen-like, his acceptance of life.
Is there kind of a personal philosophy have you tried to become more Buddhist or Zen about this profession, or is it tough to do?
No. If I don't know whether it's Buddhist or Zen-like, and I don't think it is, but my whole philosophy is that I have always been lucky, and I just let luck and fate do what it does, and for the most part, it smiles on me. So I just accept whatever the universe gives me. Perhaps that's an Eastern way of looking at things, although I can't point to any definitive principles in that way. But the gods have always been good to me, and I just wait for their raining nice things upon me.
So have there been ever any times when you did ever really pursue something, that you really went after a role or a project?
Well, ironically, the one project that I really did pursue and then got was the character of Quark on Deep Space Nine. When I heard that Deep Space Nine was looking to have a series regular that was a Ferengi, because I had played Ferengi before, I thought, well, it should be me, and I actively pursued it, little knowing that they were actively pursuing me, but I didn't know that at the time. As I've gotten older and I see certain plays happening around the country, sometimes I'll call my agent up and say, listen, I understand they're doing King Lear at the Guthrie. Is it possible for me to audition, send in a tape to audition for this? And I've done that probably about a dozen times. Most of the time it doesn't work out, and sometimes it does.
So when you were actively pursuing Quark, so what did that look like for you, different than just, letting your agent know you're interested in this?
Well, I kept pushing the agent. First of all, I pushed them, and almost immediately they were able to get me an audition. And I auditioned, and then I kept pushing the agent to get feedback or see if there's going to be a callback. And for at least a month, there was nothing. And I kept pushing them. I'd call them every other day. Any news? No news. And we went through that for about a month. And I was sort of heartbroken because I thought, well, if not me, then who? Eventually, 6 weeks after my first audition, and that's a long time for a callback. 6 weeks after my first audition, they called me back. And when I finished that, it took another week before they called me in for the third and last time. And I did what I had to do, and they hired me.
Now, I remember years ago you telling me a story of you were walking into an audition and you tripped slightly on the carpet.
Oh, yeah.
Was this for Quark?
That was a commercial audition.
Oh, okay.
For Sears. And I tripped in the midst of the audition. And that, again, is proof positive that I just leave myself open to either successes or mistakes. My mistakes have almost sometimes been greater and more profitable than my successes. That was a mistake, just a physical mistake. I tripped in the midst of the audition. This made the people who were casting, they told me later on, laugh. And because they laughed, they thought, oh, he's the guy. Nobody else would make them laugh. Although the part didn't call for anyone to make someone laugh. And I just got cast, and they had seen, they told me, dozens, if not hundreds of people for the role. And
do you think like on just some subconscious level, they were looking for somebody that was easy to work, or was either fun or just relaxed? I don't know, Nathan. You have to ask them. One would assume that, but what they were looking for, they never explained to me. I asked them, I think point blank, why did you choose me? And they said, because you made us laugh. You did something in your audition where you sort of, it looked like you tripped. And I thought to myself, I did trip. And never went any further with them because there's no point explaining that it wasn't purposeful. Of course.
But I never pressed it any further.
All right. So taking it back to high school for a minute, do you remember the first play that you did that the gentleman invited you to audition? Santa Monica, certainly, was The Crucible.
I did The Crucible, and I got cast as John Proctor. And I remember in performance I think we only did it 3 times, but in one of the 3 performances, I got lost in the role. You understand what I'm saying. I went on stage and then came off stage and didn't remember Armin being on stage. I remember being totally involved as John Proctor, and that feeling was such a thrill, such an incredible roller coaster ride, a dazzling and exciting one, that I thought, I'd like to do more of that. And one tries to get to that nirvana in every performance. Unfortunately, I've come to learn that it's very rare when that happens.
And so was that kind of a moment that really hooked you and made you feel like you need to keep doing more of this?
Yes, exactly. That was exactly that. And also, people were being very kind about my abilities as an actor. And up until that time, I had a bad feeling about myself, in the sense I was insecure. And when I stepped on stage and performed, I felt in total control and felt that I was fulfilling, to the best of my ability, whatever potential I had. And that was a great feeling as well. When I stepped off stage, I became Armin again, as opposed to being Armin in small letters, as opposed to being John Proctor in large caps. And when I realized that I could be free, I could be heroic, I could be whatever I wanted on stage within reason, I began to think I need to get back in that arena to do that more often, so that I feel better about myself, and that I feel that I am contributing and that I am of value. I think more than anything, of value.
And since this was your first play, full production.
It wasn't my first, actually. My first was back in New Jersey, and it was a production of 12 Angry Men. And the only reason I auditioned for The Crucible was because I had done 12 Angry Men. So it wasn't a totally new thing to go, I've never done this before, I don't think I will do it. But because I had done it, one play anyway, in my freshman year in New Jersey, I had some background. But it was, it wasn't an important thing. It was just one of the things I did in New Jersey. I played soccer. I did a play, and I worked. I was a caddy. I did all kinds of things. It wasn't the most important thing, but I had done it, and so I said to myself, well, you did it once, you could do it again. I had no idea they were going to cast me as the lead. In fact, when I auditioned for John Proctor, I hadn't read the play. It was stupid me. And I had no idea who John Proctor was. So when they said, okay, you're John Proctor, I went, okay. And then I read the play after I was cast and went, oh my God, he's the lead in the play.
You did, a few more plays in high school. And then when you were going on to college, you were planning to major in what you said, poli-sci?
Poli-sci, yeah.
Okay. So where did that decision come from to do poli-sci?
I think it seemed like everyone was becoming an attorney. So I thought, okay, I'll become an attorney too. My background was literary. I was an English major in college. I was not a theater major. And, I started out in poli-sci. Then I realized I was never really going to become an attorney. So I switched to English, and I graduated with an English degree. But when I went to college, everybody was becoming an attorney, and I didn't know what else. I had no real interests per se. And college is about finding yourself, and so I went to college to find myself, and I guess I did. Even though it was not my major, I was doing quite a few plays in college, and out of college too, for that matter. And I just sort of followed those footsteps. And then, as I said, the gods were very kind to me. Fate was very kind. And before I graduated in my senior year, I was chosen to be at the Globe, and 800 people auditioned for, I believe, 8 parts, and I was one of the 8. And as it turned out, I got the best parts of the 8. So fate has always been enormously good to me, and I just trust it. I trust it to take care of me. Sometimes it doesn't, but for the most part, it does.
Now, you're at college at UCLA, and so what did you take away most from your time acting at UCLA?
I found I had auditioned in high school, but I soon became the leading actor in high school, so there was no competition, really. If I auditioned for a part, I assumed I was going to get it. When I went to college, I was an English major or a poli-sci major, and I was competing with theater majors, and I was getting the parts that I wanted. So it sort of informed me that I could compete with other people and be successful. And it was a great learning experience to say, okay, I can compete with the big boys, although those guys weren't the big boys, but at that time they were, and I can be successful. So that was a great experience. Also, in college, I learned about many things. Most importantly, about Shakespeare, and both my acting in Shakespeare and my study of Shakespeare as an English major is, of course, the thrust of my career outside of acting. My as you know, my teaching and directing, writing, everything is in some way usually connected to my study of Shakespeare.
And what was it that really resonated with you or drew you to? I mean, it's kind of an easy question, but yeah, the language. Okay.
It was language. Shakespeare's language was intriguing, puzzling, enigmatic, frustrating, and as I began to be able to decipher that language, as I began to understand better the feelings and emotions and thoughts of these Shakespearean characters, the more I was intrigued by what I could learn from reading and performing the plays.
So, you mentioned it, and I want to get to the Old Globe in a second, but in terms of being 8 of 800 or, all the other things that you've gotten in your career, when you look back, do you feel like there was a confidence inherent in your auditioning or an ease? Like, I mean,
there was for a period of time. Again, the gods were good to me. When I moved to New York after San Diego, almost immediately I was working. And almost immediately, I got a Broadway show. And in time, I did 4 Broadway shows and lots of regional theater. So the success rate that I was experiencing was giving me an ease. There's always an angst when you audition, so it's not like I was totally confident. But I saw that for the most part, I could compete now absolutely with the big boys, and be successful. There have been long and many periods of time when that confidence has disappeared. There was a period of time after I moved to California from New York that it was terrifying for me to go to auditions, and eventually I got over that terror. But there was a long, I would say, 2-year period of time when no work came, and I was shooting myself in the foot every time I auditioned.
I mean, you said you eventually got over it. Was it, what kind of rituals or processes did you use? Because, I mean, a lot of people deal with that terror, I think, of auditioning or feeling like the people in the room are against them. So to some degree, it's in your head. But how did you get through that period?
I don't know. I think what happened was I had an audition for something that I didn't really care about at all. Although at that point I needed money. Every audition was important because we were financially strapped. But I think there was one where I really didn't care and didn't want to do it. And so I went in with that attitude, and it was successful, and it turned out to be much better than I thought. I will answer your question a different way. In the last 5 years, I'm happy to admit that on occasion I will take a quarter of an Ativan to deal with those large butterflies, and that's very helpful.
Well, I mean, these the medication is out there for a reason. So yeah, if it helps you and doesn't get in the way of anything else, then why not?
It doesn't, and it's a placebo in a sense. Mm-hmm. It probably does calm me down, But more than calming me down, if I take that quarter of an Ativan, I think, okay, well, there I go. They're not going to get in the way. And so because I don't think they're going to get in the way, they don't get in the way.
Yeah. Yeah. The power of placebos or power of suggestion can be pretty amazing.
Yeah. And I'm very grateful for that. Because auditions have always been a scary situation, and I'm in awe of the guys who I see in the waiting rooms who don't seem to be fearful. Perhaps they are, and they're just covering, or perhaps they aren't. But it would be great to have that sort of nerves of steel.
So, well, jumping back to a time when you did, you were very lucky, but I'm sure also prepared when you got the apprenticeship at the Old Globe. So, what was that program that you were getting involved in?
Well, at that time, the Globe Theater had an apprenticeship, and they hired a group of actors. In the summer that I was there were 8 of us, I believe, and we played the smallest of parts. We were spirit carriers, or we had small parts, and we understudied, and we also did tech work. We built props and helped with the set, and we did whatever the theater asked us to do. The great thing was we got to work with wonderful actors and watch them perform and watch how they rehearsed. And for me, that was an enormous education. I worked with some phenomenal actors whose work I still admire these 40, 50 years later. And then again, the gods smiled on me, and the man I was understudying left to do a TV pilot, and the artistic director who'd been watching my progress during the summer was kind about saying, we want you to take over the part, 3 parts. And so I went on to play the comic leads for at least about I'd say 2 or 3 weeks at the end of the summer. And it was a great learning experience. Again, this time, I was playing with the big boys and getting my laughs, and the actors that I had been in awe of all summer were complimenting me on my work and treating me as a peer. So I was blessed that way, and that really is the secret of my success. Yes, I prepare. Yes, I have talent. Yes, I'm good at what I do, but I'm blessed with a cornucopia of luck.
Well, I know I've heard this definition that opportunity is when luck meets preparation. That, Yeah,
I think in my case, that's true. I do a lot of preparation, but I'm also enormously lucky. I'm also unlucky. It's not like everything is. There are many times where I have not been chosen, and sometimes not being chosen is better. I have a handful of occasions where I didn't get chosen for something, and luckily for me, I wasn't chosen, and something better came along. Or people who had seen me prior to the project I eventually did saw me and remembered me and said, okay, we didn't use him then, but we'd like to use him now. So I've come to learn that even if you don't get something, it doesn't mean that the opportunity is over. It only means it may be postponed.
Well, yeah, I've often heard, the kind of the mindset for auditioning is you're not going in to get that part, you're going in to get the next audition.
Exactly.
And yeah, I mean, have you found that to be? Well, it sounds like that you found that to be pretty true.
I have found that to be true. My career is thanks to many people who were kind enough to help me up. Many of them were casting directors who didn't always cast me in the projects I originally came in, but would keep calling me in. And if they're continually calling you in, if the same casting people are calling you in on a regular basis, then you know that they like your work. They're just trying to find the part for you. They may say, this is a wonderful actor, and their producers may say, yeah, but he's not right for this. And I can point to dozens of casting directors who've been kind that way. Also directors who I've worked for and have used me over again.
So you're doing, these lead parts at the Globe. How long of a program was it? Was it
No, no, yeah, yes, yeah, yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
How long of a program was it that you were apprenticing?
It was just for summer.
Oh, okay.
It was from it was from like I would say May to Labor Day, and you know, at the time there were some wonderful older actors, as I've mentioned. There was also some wonderful younger actors. There was a young actor who was an apprentice, but he was one step above me in the hierarchy of things, and that was Chris Reeve, who went on to play Superman.
Of course, yeah.
And Bob Hayes was in my apprenticeship program with me. He went on to play the lead in Airplane, and other things. So it was a great summer, and I worked with some phenomenal actors, and not just phenomenal actors. I had the enormous honor to work with Jack O'Brien, who's perhaps America's finest theater director, and it was the beginning of his career too. So and Jack was very kind to me over the course of many years. I never worked with him again as an actor, but he was instrumental in getting me a number of auditions when I lived in New York.
Well, so when you finished up at the Globe, what was your decision-making process at that point?
Yeah. Well, here's the story that I often tell, so I'll bore you with it. The day before I was supposed to transition from my apprentice roles to the comic leads, I was doing a performance of Merry Wives of Windsor. And in that play, as in my apprentice role, I was playing Bardolph, which is a very small part. And Bardolph has a change of costume towards the beginning of the play. And my first costume was held together by a string. And when I finished my last performance of the first scene, I went up to my dressing room and sort of did this Hulk thing where I burst all the threads on the costume because I'd been so ginger about making sure that nothing came apart, and because I had been aware for weeks, if not months, about how flimsy the costume was. So I decided, well, I never have to wear this piece of shit again, and I'm just going to rip it apart, and I did. And as I'm ripping it apart and gleefully laughing about what I'm doing, I hear a scene on the loudspeaker that I'm supposed to be in the costume that's now on the floor. And I realized that I'm supposed to be on stage that very moment. The scene that they're doing involves my character, and my character, although he had very little to say in the scene, was very pivotal to the scene. I didn't know what to do, and I couldn't get back to my costume. It was in tatters on the floor. And eventually I ran down there in my next costume, but by that time the scene was over. And later that day, the artistic director, Craig Nolan, called me into his office and reamed me a new asshole for having missed a scene, and told me that if he didn't need me to continue in these bigger parts, he would have fired me that day. I was despondent all summer long. Part of the program was that after each summer, one of the apprentices would be asked back the next year to be an equity member of the company. Even long before I got the promotion, it was obvious to everyone, or at least to me anyway, that I was the person that was going to be selected, because I had the best of the apprentice roles. I was getting not great reviews by any means, but I was being mentioned in reviews, and people were astonished that my small parts was getting noticed. And so I assumed I was going to be that person, and that's what I wanted. Having just finished college, the idea of being a Shakespearean actor at a Shakespeare festival seemed ideal to me, and it's what I wanted. But when Craig Knoll told me that he would have fired me, and I went back to my lonely apartment, I realized that they were not going to hire me the next year, that was out of the question. All summer long, while I was thinking the thoughts that I was going to stay in San Diego, there were a number of actors from New York who were all trying to convince me to move to New York. And when I realized that my future in the Globe was over, I thought, well, maybe I should listen to all those guys and move to New York. So subsequent to my being at the Globe, after about 6 months preparation to move to New York, I moved to New York, and almost immediately got work in regional theater. I was working in a restaurant primarily as a waiter, but sometimes as a cook as well. But I was almost immediately starting to do regional theater, and then after 2 regional theater gigs, I moved into New York City with a girlfriend, and then I think I moved into New York City in October, and by the end of December of that same year, I was in a Broadway show.
So, did you have? Well, there's a lot I could talk about there. I mean, I can't imagine how devastating that conversation from the artistic director was. I mean, not to mention, like,
it was.
As an actor, you already feel horrible knowing you messed up. Like, no actor ever wants to go through that experience. And then to have that all come tumbling down, I'm sure was just unbelievable.
But that's where my other part of my philosophy was first inspired. Yes, I had fucked up royally. It decimated my plans to be a Shakespearean actor at the Globe Theater. But because I fucked up, because I made that huge mistake, it took me to New York, where much better things happened, including my meeting of Kitty. So I've come to learn, when you screw up, it doesn't necessarily mean it's the end of the world. There may be something better around the corner. This is why I say the fates take care of me. Even when I screw up badly, it doesn't mean that's the end of the road. It just means that you're taking another path that may lead you to some better place.
Okay, so taking that path to New York and you're getting the regional theater stuff. Did you have an agent at that time?
No agent. I didn't have an agent until after I did my first Broadway show, and then I had primarily a commercial agent who also had a theatrical department, and that too is a matter of luck. If you want to hear that story,
well, yeah, we can definitely get to that. I'm curious though, like, were you equity by the time you moved to New York?
No, I was SAG. Again, luck played its part. I went to a film audition in San Diego while I was working at the Globe, and I had no desire to go. Just my friends were going. I said, "Okay, I'll go with you, sure." And I read, and they cast me, and it's a long story which I won't go into. And then they made me SAG, and so I was SAG, but that didn't necessarily mean that was a road into equity. When I did my first regional theater job, then I became equity because I had done a regional theater job.
Okay. And so those were just casting notices that you had heard about or friends knew about, and so you guys just went on these auditions?
For a regional theater?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I just heard about the auditions and I went. There was no agent submitting me, no. And I would go in and they would ask for a classical and a modern audition, and I had 2 up my sleeve that were very good, and they got me work.
Which what were the 2 pieces?
One was from a Soroyan play called Hello Out There. That was my modern piece. And then one was from Henry VI, Part 3, the character is Richard of Gloucester.
Okay, great. Maybe we'll get to that a little bit later. So the Broadway play I want to talk about, because that was the 3-penny opera, right?
Right, that's right.
And so that was just another audition that you just went on, no agent, and was that the process for auditioning for that show?
Yes and no. So I moved to New York, and regional theaters had auditions, and I wrote to the public theater, Joe Papp's Public Theater, and said I'd like to audition. And I was answered by the casting director. He set up an appointment, and he said, I would like for you to come in and do one classical monologue for us. And I was prepared to do my Richard of Gloucester piece. And when I do that piece, I sort of take on a limp, and I I appear to be hunchbacked, and my right arm appears to be shorter than my left arm. And it's a physical transformation along with a notable emotional attachment to the lines in the character. So I'm sitting in the hallway waiting for my audition at the Public Theater and going over my lines for Richard of Gloucester. And the casting director comes out and says, "Welcome." And he has all these physical braces on his legs and arms and back because he is indeed a hunchback. And I, being in my mid or late 20s, think I can't do my Richard III because I will look like him, and he may be offended by my physicalization.
Right, sure.
And so I'm walking into the room thinking as fast as I can, I can't do the piece that I want to do. So we get into the room. He asks me, what is it I'm going to do? And because in high school I had done Claudius from Hamlet, I said, I'm going to do that. And I did it. And he was very taken with it. And then he said to me, do you have anything else? And I looked at him and I thought, I can't do Richard III. No. So I did Puck instead. And he was very taken with that. Very complimentary. And then he said, do you have anything else? And for a moment I thought, well, I could do my best piece, which is Richard of Gloucester, but I was too intimidated at that point and said no. So after that, about 2 months later, he brought me in for the director and the producer for Threepenny Opera. And it wasn't a reading because we didn't have anything to say really. And it was an improv. And I did that. And then they brought me in for a second improv soon after. And that's how I got Threepenny Opera. And I was cast in the chorus. Again, the gods were looking after me because I was cast in the chorus. Now, when you picture chorus in your mind, you think that's got to be somebody who sings and dances, which I don't do. But we were in the chorus, and we did do a minuscule amount of singing, really nothing at all. Our primary purpose was to look bizarre and to move furniture, which I was very capable and expert at doing. And so they hired me for that. And then again, like at the Globe, everybody had an understudy position that was in the chorus, but I was the only person whose people that I was understudying moved on, and I took over the roles. Nobody else in the chorus did that, except for me. So again, that's just fate and luck looking after me.
It does sound like a very, the more you describe it, it does sound like there is a kind of a divine intervention to some degree in your career. Now that production, at least it opened with Raul Julia in the lead role.
That's right.
He was, I guess, kind of a known actor by that point. He'd already been doing a lot of stuff in New York. Did you take anything away specifically from watching him work or others in that cast?
No, not so much from Raul, because Raul's performance, which was stupendous, was very, what's the word? Our director was a master puppeteer, and Richard Foreman. And he had Raul doing all these stylized things that were unique to this production. Raul would never move the way he moved on stage in this production. He would never speak the way. It was all very unique, very stylized, and right on the money. Richard's vision of the play was stupendous. But he had Raul and some of the others doing very idiosyncratic things. So I didn't really learn from Raul. However, there were other people, Elizabeth Wilson, for instance, or David Sabin. Those people I watched and learned from. There wasn't anything that I thought that I could learn from Raul, not because he wasn't worth watching, but because he was just so idiosyncratic. his acting was very Brechtian, if we can call it that, and I wasn't all that interested in becoming a Brechtian actor.
Well, one of the things that, as you're describing it, I think of is, and I think I have a limitation in myself to some degree, is that willingness to be able to do anything, or at least to try anything. Even if you might think even if you disagree with the director, or you think it's silly or whatever like that. But I mean, that does sound like, at least to some degree, an actor, in Raul's case, just being willing to totally commit himself to trying this and seeing what comes out of it.
Yes, and there was great rebellion in the first 2.5 weeks of rehearsal. The actors did not want to do what Richard Foreman asked them to do, especially the older actors. They were angry, but eventually they came around, and the production, which during previews looked like a major disaster, opened to glorious reviews, and we ran for 1.5 years. So yes, Raul did that, and yes, everybody eventually did do that. But there was great reluctance on the part of the actors, especially the older actors. But they eventually came around. Richard was very, very, if I can use this term, avant-garde, and has always been avant-garde. If you look up avant-garde in the theater, you're going to find Richard Foreman. But they eventually came around, and that's one of the things I learned. You've been talking about Raul Julia, and I said I didn't really learn much from Raul. However, his replacement was a man named Phil Bosco.
Oh, sure.
And I owe a great deal, not only from Threepenny, but from the next play we did together, St. Joan. I probably learned more about being an actor and acting from Phil Bosco, Raul's replacement, than from any other actor I've ever been with.
How so?
It's not that I learned so much during Threepenny, because again, it was a very stylistic thing. But when Phil and I went on to our next Broadway shows, which we were both in St. Joan with Lynn Redgrave, I watched almost every night one particular long scene that Phil and two other wonderful actors were in. And it was a master's class in doing Shaw. And I sucked up everything I could from those three actors, primarily from Phil. And aside from that, Phil, who sort of took me under his wing in St. Joan, I learned more about what it means to be an ensemble actor and to be the lead, because he was the lead. The lead in Lynn was the lead; she was St. Joan, but the male lead was Phil Bosco. And to learn about community, about sharing, about supportiveness, about humility, about not being humble. Phil was my role model for how to become the type of actor I wanted to become. And he had more humanity towards me, who was a total unknown and just a kid, lurking about in his shadows. And he was very, very, very kind and very supportive. And although he never said, "Okay, kid, you got to learn this, you got to learn it," he never said anything like that. Just simply by my watching him continually, practically for about 1 year, I learned a lot of how I approach other actors, how I approach the business, how I approach a lot of stuff because of that early training from Phil Bosco.
That's pretty amazing. I mean, it sounds like it almost kind of rivals the summer you did at the Globe. And it's amazing when you can come across these people who, and Armin, I don't want to make you, too red in the face, but, I would say you are someone like that for me. Thank you, Nate. Yeah, no, when I've taken class with you or just observed you, it's just, you've been so giving and so warm, and especially with the teaching too, which we can talk about. But, it is really wonderful when, there is kind of one person you can point to that has really had such an impact on your career. And so when you're talking about Phil and the work he did with Shaw, what was, if you could distill it down, or if there were a couple things that you...
Sure. I can't easily do that because I watched it night after night. He had a way of technically speaking, he had an incredible mastery of parentheticalizing things. So that he would make you understand this is the thrust of the sentence. And then he would parentheticalize some of the Shavian adjuncts that are attached to the sentence. And he had this way of speaking Shaw that was both musical and informative. It always led you to the core of what was being said. And in rehearsal, Phil asked these amazing questions about what the lines meant, and always was totally open to getting whatever the other actors in the scene were bringing to him. He would go through the script and reassure himself of the choices that he had made, and continually searched for new choices, which is something that he taught me and which I continue to do, which is that your research process is not over when the show opens. You continue to look for any nuggets of gold that you can find, either in performance or in the script. But he also had this panache that was perfectly Shavian. And when I read plays that are Shavian, I often hear Phil's voice in my head when I'm reading the line.
All right, so I want to potentially make a little bit of a leap here, and I'm just curious: did Phil fulfill any kind of like fatherly role in your life? I mean, I know your parents got divorced. Did you have?
I don't think fatherly, but more teacher-like.
Okay,
he was a mentor. He was fatherly in the sense that he was kind to me and invited me to things that, small things, there weren't a lot of them, but that perhaps I wouldn't have been invited to. I remember they used to play poker between shows on Saturday, and I would say, Phil, I'd like to play poker, and he'd go, no, Armin, you can't play. You need to save your money. So I guess in that sense, he was fatherly. And he never called me Armin, by the way. It's one of the great pleasures of my life. Phil, who I'd worked shoulder to shoulder, literally shoulder to shoulder for an entire year between two plays, Threepenny and St. John, never, ever, ever called me Armin. Always called me Norman. And I'm just gratified by that, because it was a mistake in the beginning, but it was a sign of affection that he never changed over from Armin to Norman or Norman to Armin.
Sure.
He was, and a lot of actors my age who lived in New York thought of Phil Bosco as a god. Although he's not known to the general public, whenever there was a Shavian play done on Broadway or off Broadway, Phil was invariably the lead because he was just so good at it. And he was the actor's actor. He had worked in regional theaters across the country, not across the country, in the East Coast primarily. And he didn't do much film or TV because I think it's because he had a fear of flying and he didn't want to get in a plane to come to Hollywood. When films were shot in New York, half the time he would be in them.
Yeah, I mean, I would say people even of my generation, I probably more know him from, the film and TV work he did. And it is almost, well, I don't know if sad is the right word, but you wish there were a way to, go back and watch these things. But because, someone with that depth of talent, his medium was clearly theater.
It was.
But it
was indeed. And he worked constantly in it. And he gave some performances that were just brilliant. And the curse and blessing of the theater is that only the people in the room that night have the memories, and that's it. Nobody else does. And that's, as I said, both a curse and a blessing.
Sure. So, all right. Well, I could talk to you another 4 hours just about your time in New York, but you said, I wanted to get to a little bit of the TV and film work you've done, but you said you had a story about commercials related maybe to your commercial agent.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's actually still in New York, but again, luck. The union equity used to require agents to see new actors once a month. As I remember, it was a Wednesday. And I was looking for a commercial agent, and I knew that one particular agent had open hours because of the union requirement. So I went in and met with one of the two partners. His name was Armin. And I was there for about, I don't know, a minute at the most. It was quite obvious this was not going well. He didn't want to be there. He was only required to be there because the union had required him. He had no desire to see me or anyone else for that matter. So I left, not thinking anything would come of it. About 6 weeks later, I got a phone call from that office saying, could you come in and meet the other agents in the office? Which I did. And there were 3 women, and it went very well. I can be very charming when I want to be. And they decided to sign me on. So that was how I got my first commercial agent, and they sort of also had a theatrical part of their office as well. Several years later, when I'd been there for a while, I asked one of the agents, why did they call me in 6 weeks later when obviously the initial meeting was so poor? So here's luck. I happened to ask the right agent because when I came in for that initial meeting, at that time, she was sitting at the front door as a receptionist was an agent wannabe. And she told me this story. She said, on that day that I came in, and probably another dozen or 24 people came in, and Arnie, the big agent partner, made 2 piles. There was a large pile of people he never wanted to see again, and there was 1 or 2 people that in a small pile that he said, yes, maybe we should see them again. And the lady's name was Joanne Halpern. She now is a manager here in Los Angeles. And Joanne said that afternoon, somebody came in and a big blast of wind came in through the door. And your picture, Armin, fell to the floor. I didn't know which pile it belonged to, so I just put you in the small pile. That's just luck.
Well, I agree. And I'm going to have to, I want to reinforce another thing that you've been talking about is preparation. If you weren't prepared, I think when they called you in 6 weeks later, if you weren't someone that had the goods, so to speak, it might have gone very differently. So I do want to, just for people listening, kind of reinforce that it's not, you're not just someone who, strolls down the street and, jobs are thrown at you. I mean, you do the work. And I know that personally too.
It's true. I do the work, but I'd be a fool.
There has been some kind of helping hand, right? Yeah.
It's not that I believe. I'm not religious by any means. I just think I'm lucky, and whatever luck is, I seem to have a great reservoir of it. And I will say, in juxtaposition to that luck, I am a very specific-looking person. I am not your normal-looking actor. When I first started out, long before I went to college, or while I was in college, actually, my first teacher said, "Armin, you're never going to be on TV and film. You just don't look like anything on TV. So that should not be your focus." And she said, "Theater should be your focus." So I always knew, I had the mirror as well to tell me, that I was unique and different, and not anything that you would say was Hollywood. So I bounced between those 2 understandings of myself. The first, that I'm hard to cast, and 2, that I'm very lucky.
Well, so to jump off of that, you said when you moved back from New York to Los Angeles, was that the challenging period for auditioning?
Yeah, because in New York, I had, in a matter of 8 years, progressed up the ladder. I had 4 Broadway shows, done a lot of regional theater. I was in the mix with all the best people in New York. I had achieved more than a modicum of success, and was what you call a working actor. When I moved to Hollywood, and that wasn't supposed to be a move in the beginning. It was just supposed to be a visit. But when it extended itself and became 2 years, nothing was happening, and I was at the bottom of the hierarchy. I was an unemployed actor in Hollywood, where they didn't care tuppence about what regional theater work you had done or what Broadway work you had done. As a casting director once said to me, "Oh, Armin, you're an actor, but we don't need an actor. We just need somebody to play this part." And I was despondent about my lack of success. And thankfully, at that point, a number of my commercials that I had shot in New York, and some that I had done in LA as well, were playing, and so we were able to, keep from being evicted from where we were living. But it was close. It was very close.
And while you were waiting for the new work to come in, were you taking classes or doing plays, or how were you just kind of keeping yourself?
I was doing plays. I was working at the Victory Theater, which had just opened. My friends from UCLA were running the Victory Theater. They still are. And so I did plays at the Victory. I had some success in regional theater. So while I was living in LA, not getting any foothold in the movie or TV business, I was called out to work at the Guthrie and 1 or 2 other regional theaters because I had made connections there. So I was starving in LA, but I still had connections in the theater world, which helped. So I wasn't destitute, but if my focus and my thrust was to get work in TV and film, it wasn't happening for the longest period of time.
When was it that if things started to turn around in Los Angeles that you felt like, okay, this is the right decision, or this has been the right move?
Well, it wasn't until really until I was 40. I had made a pact with myself that when I got to be 40, I would look at my career, look at myself, look at my financial situation, and say, should I stay with this career or should I move on to something else? I didn't know what I would move on to, but I knew that at 40, if I wasn't where I wanted to be, that I needed to move on. Now, I'd already had, as I said, success in the theater, but I was living in LA now. And after many years at 40, I realized that it was time to move on, that this was not working. And I didn't want to live hand to mouth for the rest of my life. Didn't want to do that for myself. Certainly didn't want to do that for my wife. And then out of the blue, no audition. And I wasn't the type of actor who got work without auditions. But without an audition, one day the agent called and said, "You've been hired to do a show called Brooklyn Bridge." And I said, "Okay, great." And that turned out to be a recurring character. I didn't know that when I was first hired, but it did turn out to be a recurring character. And that reinvigorated my desire to continue. And then really very shortly after, about 6 or 7 episodes after Brooklyn Bridge is when they held the auditions for Deep Space Nine, and we know what happened after that. So
when you landed Quark, I mean, it's a very unique character in terms of his background and all that, but then just the makeup, the prosthetics, was there anything that developed in terms of your acting process that was informed by playing that character?
Yeah, absolutely. Up until then, I'm about 40 at this time. I was still somewhat of a reticent person, very bashful, very insecure. um, fully aware of my successes in the theater, very proud of them, and they had taught me a great deal, but still sort of a reticent person. When I put on the makeup and the teeth and got paid as well as I did, my confidence exponentially rose, and my ability to be forthcoming, both as a person and as a performer, just expanded tremendously. So that's what the role did for me. It gave me a confidence and an expansiveness that I had never had before, and I grew to like it, and people expected it of me, and so I became much, much more extroverted than I had ever been when I was 40.
So after you got Quark, when did teaching come in? Because obviously that, that was, it didn't sound like it was part of it up to that point.
It was, actually.
Oh, okay.
My first recurring part in my mid-30s was for a show called Beauty and the Beast, and I played a character called Pascal. And that was the first time ever that I had been a recurring guest star on a TV show. Many wonderful things happened while I was doing that show, including a confidence and somewhat of a financial security, somewhat, because recurring doesn't mean much. But one of the nice things was on the show was another recurring character named Ellen Gear, who runs the Theatricum Botanicum. And she came up to me one day while we were working together on the set and said, "How would you like to come to the Theatricum and teach?" And I said, I don't teach. She said, but we'd had conversations about Shakespeare. And she said, "I think you could. I think you could teach. I think, you should try it." So I went down to Theatricum and taught and began to codify some of my thoughts about Shakespeare and Shakespearean acting. And I taught for Theatricum, still teach for Theatricum, so it's been 30 years or so that I've been teaching at Theatricum. And because I was teaching at the Theatricum, it branched out, and I taught a little at the Victory. I, of course, teach at our theater at Antioch. I've taught in a number of different places now because of the confidence I got about teaching that I got from Ellen and the Theatricum. And now, as you know, I now teach at USC as the professor of Shakespeare for the undergraduates. Well,
to actually go from there, I would love to jump into, just looking at a portion of the text from Henry VI, Part 3, the Richard of Gloucester speech that you had referenced earlier, that you used as a monologue earlier. And I was wondering if you could just, highlight how you approach this speech in particular, and maybe some of the ideas that you use in terms of, what you teach for Shakespeare, and then what you use personally.
Well, one of the things I teach, the thrust of my teaching in Shakespeare is a system of study that Shakespeare himself studied, and all of his contemporaries studied, and people for millennium studied. It's called rhetoric, and it's the way you put language together to form arguments in order to convince people of the rightness of an idea or of an action. And one of the things about rhetoric is that you say things in a sort of interesting way in order to catch people's attention and to make them remember. For instance, you're perhaps too young to have heard it originally, but the phrase that Kennedy used still lives and rings through people's minds, which is, "Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country." And that's a rhetorical piece. Why is it rhetorical? Because there's a twist in the middle, and that's part of rhetoric. And also, there's the repetition of words. Ask not is echoed in ask in the second part of the phrase, ask. That's called antithesis, and also what I call juxtaposition. So in a lot of Shakespeare, there are these juxtapositions, antithetical. The most famous antithetical in Shakespeare is to be or not to be. That's an antithetical. Either you are to be or you aren't not to be. And that's littered throughout my audition speech. There is also classical references in the course of my speech. All of those have to be explored, investigated, understood, and you are all of that is material in order to make an argument, to make a supposition. And then when you've made the conclusion of that supposition, you then progress on from there. That's what my audition speech is about. There are a number of suppositions that come to a conclusion, and then having made that conclusion, you find a course of action. So that's what I teach, and that's what's in the speech.
Okay, so, and just for context, this is...
It's laid in the play of Henry VI, Part 3.
Okay, and it is quite a long speech. Where would you usually start it for your monologue?
I started it in the middle. Somewhere in the middle, it starts with, well, say there is no kingdom then for Richard. And that's the supposition. Well, suppose I can't get what I want. And then there are a lot of suppositions made, and eventually you come to a conclusion. It starts there, and I did some judicious cutting so that it lasted no more than, I think, 2 minutes at the most. And I've, worked on it. I've had revelations about the speech over the course of my lifetime. But usually when I do it as an audition, and I don't have to do it that often anymore, but when I do it, I usually find something new in the speech. And that's the great thing about Shakespeare. You always find something new.
And do you enjoy teaching Shakespeare more, or acting, or directing? What?
I actually prefer teaching it more, because there's such joy in me when I see a student who knew nothing about rhetoric before, where a line made no sense before. When they learn the principles of rhetoric and they put the acting techniques that go with the rhetoric together with the understanding of rhetoric, and all of a sudden a light goes off in their head and they go, oh, I see, I got it, I understand. That to me is as precious as the finest Christmas gift that you can get. It is why I teach, is to see that light go off, to see someone who didn't understand something before understand it now, and to become a better actor because of their understanding of this acting technique.
Now, I remember when we first talked about this in another call about this piece, you mentioned you could kind of relate to the insecurity and anger in Richard.
Right. The rhetoric is what I've been talking about, mm-hmm. But what drew me to the piece is the insecurity and the self-loathing that is intrinsic in the piece. And that's what drew me to the piece. It was part and parcel of my youth, of my insecurity before my successes, and I can look back on that and still remember it. And so it will fuel my audition when I do it. But it's no longer as the fire doesn't burn as bright as it used to.
But you're saying you had that same kind of self-loathing as a kid, or
no? But I can draw upon my old feeling about that. As I said, about the time. I would say somewhere in my late 30s, at 40, there was probably quite a bit of that still hanging around. But my life took such a turn for the better, as far as career and finances and security, that and also just an understanding of who I am and how I fit into the jigsaw puzzle of life, community, friendships. That self-loathing, I believe, it's still with me a little, but very tiny compared to how large it loomed when I was in my late 30s and at 40.
Well, would you be comfortable sharing a little bit of the piece with us?
Sure. Yeah, I could probably, if I haven't forgotten it, I think I could give you all of it.
Okay.
So it goes a little like this. Well, say there is no kingdom then for Richard. What other pleasures can the world afford? I'll make my heaven in a lady's lap, and deck my body in gay ornaments, and witch sweet ladies with my words and looks. Why, love forswore me in my mother's womb. She did corrupt frail nature with some bribe to shrink mine arm up like a withered shrub, to make an envious mountain on my back with its deformity, to mark my body, to shape my legs of an unequal size, to disproportion me in every part, like to a chaos. And am I then a man to be beloved? Huh? Then, since this earth affords no joy to me, I'll make my heaven to dream upon the crown. And yet, I know not how to get the crown, for many lives stand between me and home. Why, I can smile and murder whilst I smile, and cry content to that which grieves my heart. I can add colors to the chameleon, change shapes with Proteus for advantages, and set the murderous Machiavel to school. Can I do this, and cannot get a crown? Tut, were it further off, I will pluck it down. And that's that.
Thank you very much, Armin. That was great. You know, what really strikes me about this speech, and so many like this in Shakespeare's writing, is how the character works through this, you know, in the moment with the audience.
Right.
That he you know, he doesn't come decided. It's figuring out in the moment what he's going to do next, what's going to happen.
It is what I mentioned before, and what I'll mention again is called the argument. You figure it out. You make an argument, and either you like where the argument is going and you form a course of action, or you don't like it and you look for a different argument. But right, you don't come with an answer. You come with a supposition, and then you work it through. You work through the permutations until you come to some conclusion.
Mm. Well, taking Richard's last line, I would say with all of your good fortune, you have plucked down that crown, though not through such deceitful means.
I would agree with you, yes.
Well, I just have a few more kind of rapid fire questions, though your answers don't have to be rapid fire. Is there anything about being an actor that you really wished you had learned earlier?
Yes, I wish I had asked for help earlier. I wish I had learned to say, you know what, I don't know how to get to this audition, or to get seen for this project, or to get seen by this agent or that director or whatever. And when I knew that there were people who knew other people within the 6 degrees of separation, I never asked for help. And in hindsight, that was a mistake. I wish that I had asked for help.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a big factor, I think, as you mature, and that doesn't necessarily need to mean get older, but, you know, whenever that kind of drops in, that you realize I mean, you are even one example, just with this interview. You know, I'm asking for your help of, hey, I'd like to do this thing, and are you open to it? So, I mean, and with this project for me, like, there's a lot of other people I'm asking for help from in varying degrees. So I think it is really not overrated, but maybe underappreciated how important and necessary asking for help can be.
Really, exactly right. And the worst thing that can happen, really, is that people say no.
Right.
So you're back where you were before. All it is someone who said no. That's all you're risking, really. And most of the time, as I'm doing for you, people say yes. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it is true. It's you can make a mountain out of a molehill just trying, thinking of asking someone and getting them indebted to you. But for the most part, it's probably not a big deal to the other person. Not as big of a deal as you're making it in your head.
Right.
So, I know we've talked a lot about luck and things like that, but I am really curious, in your opinion, your belief, why do you think you have worked so much, both personally and professionally?
Yeah, I'm very talented. I'm very talented. I'm very knowledgeable, and I'm very charming. And I believe those qualities have made me successful. I don't make enemies. I'm usually very friendly, and I'm very talented. And I've come to learn that. And my success has made me even more talented because I will follow my star where it takes me, and I don't worry so much about failure anymore.
So when you're not working, how do you spend your day? Are there?
I teach.
Okay.
I teach or I read. And I'm reading for my teaching. Almost invariably, I'm reading something that's 400 years old right now. I'm reading an essay called Euphues, Euphues. It was written by John Lilly, who was a predecessor to Shakespeare. So I'm reading Euphues and how it impinges upon Love's Labour's Lost and other plays.
Armin, what is one personal accomplishment and one professional accomplishment that you're most proud of?
My personal accomplishment, that's the easiest of all, meeting and marrying and falling in love with Kitty Swink. That's absolutely my number one success. More than my career, my happiness is that. And so I'm that's number one, far and away. Number one, number two, number three, number four, all of them. Success in career, one would have to say Star Trek. Although there are a lot of roles I've done on the stage that I feel are artistically comparable to what I did in Star Trek. Star Trek, the combination of my work and the writers and the directors, I did some really important stuff, but it wasn't just me. It was everybody as a group did it together. But there are shows, plays primarily, where I've done performances and thought, that's one I can be proud of.
Well, yeah, I mean, I know you...
you want me to
Well, yeah,
one?
I know you've done very well with the Seafarer in recent years, and then playing the Fool in King Lear.
That's right, yeah. Right. And the play I just finished that I did for a number of years called Discord, where I played Tolstoy. That was a very successful thing for me. There are a number of shows where I went, okay, I got close to being Phil Bosco at that point.
I'm sure he's very proud of his Norman.
I think he is. He told me so. He wrote me a card, which I won't bore anybody with, but there was a story behind that as well. But he wrote me a card several years ago, and he was very proud of it.
Oh, good. So you are, you mentioned you're teaching at the college level right now. What, I'm sure there's a lot of things you're sharing with them specifically about Shakespeare. But if you had to give some advice to a smart, driven college student, who's about to graduate and enter the real world and wants to go into the business, what would you share with them?
Well, I have done that, and this is what I've told them. Do 3 things for your career a day. Contact someone, read a play, go to a class, check the auditions, talk to friends. Do 3 things for your career. Think of it as a business and approach it as a business. And if you do that, luck will help you. But as you said, luck will take you only so far. You have to be prepared. So, but you can't be prepared unless you get the opportunity. So doing 3 things a day should cover all bases.
Is there anything that you've heard as, quote unquote advice that you would offer people should ignore?
Yeah, I would ignore any advice that said don't do something if you're starting out in your career. Oh, don't be an extra. Don't take a small part. Don't go into commercials. I've heard all those things, and that's all, to me, antithetical to success. You should do all those things because you never know what thing or person, for that matter, that you encounter doing that small thing may branch out to be a much larger, beneficial, profitable thing.
And what would you tell your 25-year-old self?
Oh, don't be so down on yourself.
Do you think the 25-year-old Armin would listen?
No. No. It's a daunting career to become an actor.
Yeah.
It's daunting.
Yeah.
There's nothing but obstacles in the way. I don't think anything I ever heard at 25 ameliorated that huge mountain ahead of me. All I knew was, I don't know what's going to happen. I know I have to climb this mountain, but I don't know how far I get. I don't know if I'll fall off the mountain. But I know I have to do it, but it's still daunting. And there's so much rejection involved. I think, and especially in the beginning, there's so much rejection. It's hard to get past all that rejection.
Yeah, it really is. And I think, well, I mean, I have my own guesses in terms of, support system or personal belief or whatever. But what did you find was most helpful in getting through all that rejection?
Faith in myself, although that was sometimes quite weak. But I would say faith that something would show up. And in my case, it usually did. But faith in oneself, yeah. I think that's the correct answer. Also, I had the support of friends and loved ones. In my later life, my wife was an incredible support. And before Kitty appeared, there were other people who were kind and were supportive.
Well, what are you excited about right now? I mean, you've had so much success in your career and you as you've mentioned, you have a wonderful personal life as well. But what's really exciting you now?
Teaching and the maintenance and growth of Antaeus, to see the theater that I helped nurture, to see that and to see the next generation of actors coming out of that theater, moving on to the successes that myself and my friends have had. That's exciting. And to watch my students grow and learn and become better actors, that's exciting.
Well, Armin, I want to thank you so much. You've been just so gracious and open, and it's just been such a pleasure to get to know you even better.
Well, thank you, Nathan. Anytime. It's always been a pleasure. I'm a little gobsmacked at how unhumble I was, but that's what you were looking for. So
I was looking for the real deal, Armin Shimerman. Yeah, exactly. Thanks, Armin. It's been really great to talk. I really appreciate it.
We will talk soon. Bye-bye now.
Hey guys, it's Nathan here one more time. If you enjoyed this episode, please remember to subscribe to the show so you don't miss anything. And if you can take a minute to rate and review this in iTunes or wherever you find podcasts, that will help others find out about the show. I appreciate all comments and thank you very much for doing that. Be sure to visit workingactorsjourney.com for the show notes and any links from today's episode. You can also follow the show at WA Journey on Twitter and Instagram. Feel free to connect and let us know what did you enjoy from the show. Don't forget to check out freemeditationcourse.com. Sign up right now to start making your life easier, calmer, and more enjoyable. Thank you again to today's guest. I really appreciate and value all the people that contribute their time to making this show possible. I'm Nathan Agin, and thanks for listening.